Well, good evening, folks. This is Dave Schmidt. I'm your host here on the program tonight. On the Cosmic Connections. Want to thank everybody for joining us tonight. This is the November 11th program. It's Veterans Day today, and as I used to say, and I haven't been saying it recently, but I guess I can go back to it. It's 6 o'clock on the East Coast, 6 o'clock on the West Coast, 9 o'clock on the East Coast, and that's where I am now, here on the East Coast, and it's 9 o'clock here, so, and all is well. And Blanca, how are you doing on this fine evening? It's always a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you, Dave. It's nice to be here and glad that people can join us again, and happy Veterans Day.
Yes, thank you very much. So, and folks, last week I know the program was all messed up. I was in Arizona, and the place where I was staying had very, very low broad bandwidth for the internet. And I figured out after the program what the problem was, so I won't have that issue again. But, I did do the next day I did a kind of a short version issue on the program. But, Blanca, last week, we had a gentleman that had said that, everybody knows all about me, but they don't know anything about you. Who are you? Where do you come from? What's your background and all that kind of stuff? So, and the program last week didn't come out. So why don't you share with us again so people can become acquainted with you? Because you're always here on the program with me almost every week, and you're always such a wonderful addition to what we have here. So.
Well, thank you. Well, I think maybe the people who joined us on Blog Talk maybe were able to hear it, although it was cutting out. So maybe having a little bit more smooth stream will be helpful. But anyway, I did share that I was born in Texas, but in my whole career, I've lived in Chicago in my childhood, and then my adolescence in Texas, and then as an adult, I've been here in Atlanta. So those are mostly the locations that I've been in, and but most of my childhood memories are in Chicago, and so Atlanta's home. I've got a husband, and he and I have a commercial sign business, so that's what we do for a living, and we're very much, we have lots in common with Dave. Dave is an individual who likes to expand his consciousness and not necessarily accept conventional reality, and he's a thought leader and consciousness leader, and so I think we've got a lot in common with Dave, and we like to talk about issues that involve freedom and consciousness and spiritual development, and taking a look at what's going on in reality from, multiple perspectives, and not necessarily receive, what the conventional approach to interpreting reality is. And so that's a little bit about me. I told the story of how I ended up joining Dave on the show, and as I said, I was at that time, we said it was about 4 or 5 years ago, went by fast. A gentleman named Corey Good popped up in the alternative information space. He's a very controversial fellow, and he was talking about the secret space program and going into much detail about it. And he was also talking about shift in consciousness, etc. And so I was doing a little research on him, and Dave's channel popped up because Dave had inserted some of the comments that Corey Good had made about the change in consciousness and some of the things that awaited humanity. And so I got interested in Dave's show that way and continued to listen to some of his shows. And I told Alan about Dave, and I said, you ought to listen to this guy. At that time, I thought Dave was a finance guy because he was talking about currency exchanges and new financial systems and that sort of thing. And I said, it's interesting that he's talking about some of these consciousness issues as well. And so then about the time we were really getting interested in what Dave was saying, he announced that he was offering a workshop in a couple of weeks in Atlanta. So we thought it'd be a great idea to go learn more about what he had to say and meet him. And then about that same time, he announced that the woman who had been on the show with him was transitioning out. And so he was just saying if someone wanted to volunteer to work with him on the show, just to, reach out and contact him. And for some reason, it just felt like very compelling to say, hey, I'll volunteer. I talked with Alan about it, and he said, when I heard Dave's show and I heard him announce it, I also had the thought, you ought to volunteer for that. So we reached out, talked with Dave, and had a good discussion, and we told him we were coming to the workshop in a couple of weeks, so we agreed to meet him there. And so we did, and the rest is history. And so Alan and I really enjoyed our association with Dave. I think we've grown together, explored some very interesting topics together. It's been a delight to go to the workshops and meet Dave's listeners, and just delightful people. And then when you all call in with your questions, it's nice to meet you. And so it's been a real pleasure for me and an honor, and I really appreciate Dave, allowing me to be part of his endeavor.
Yes, and it has been, believe it or not, it's been 5 years. It's hard to imagine. It's hard to imagine that it's been that long, but I'm always amazed how you and I are just always on the same page on how we think alike. When it comes time to talking issues or discussing it or what we think about it, I'm just always amazed how we're always kind of on the same page. And folks, as a little side note for what you may not know, that Blanca also is basically fall into the category of being a minority. Her parents were born in Mexico, and she is Hispanic, and that's when she lived in southern Texas when her parents had basically come across and became U.S. citizens from Mexico. And so, yeah. So, well, anything else? Yeah.
So my heritage is from Mexico, and of course, I'm very honored to have very patriotic parents, and they raised us to be, very respectful of the nation and what it stands for, and to be respectful of our fellow Americans. And so, right now, and of course, Dave will be talking about some of these issues, the election issues. Some of our institutions are being tested, and Americans are being tested. And so here's a chance to see if those values that we as Americans say that we embrace, here's a test to see if we can hold them, and if we have the consciousness to move our country to its next level of expression. So that's a bit about me.
It is a very, very interesting time. And so, well, I did say that I don't have any specific announcements other than, let's see, I'll have a program next week, and then the week after is the night before Thanksgiving, and I don't do a program the night before Thanksgiving because I think, everybody's kind of wanting to get ready for the next day and stuff like that, so there will be no program there. And I'm not certain if it's the following week that I'm going to be in Oregon, but I am going to Oregon. No, I'm not, because I'm in Oregon on Thanksgiving. I'm going there to visit my daughter, where she lives, and join her for Thanksgiving. And then, I'll be at home, and then it's 2 days later as I go to Las Vegas for our last workshop this year in Las Vegas. And folks, I will be sending out in the next couple of days, opening the registration for the Las Vegas workshop. We are going to be meeting in the Sahara. Big, huge hotel resort complex right there on the Strip. We have got a meeting room in the Sahara, and so that's where we will be meeting. It's a beautiful, beautiful, almost brand new hotel. They completely redid it, and that'll be, for those of you who want to, it's a nice time to kind of get away if you want to get away from Vegas a little bit and join us for the workshop there. So, yeah. So, well, Blanca, then anything else that you would like to share with us before we get into the program tonight?
No, I think we're ready to discuss. I think people are very interested in getting your perspective on some of what you see, and so I think we're ready to go.
Well, folks, let me first of all say that in the comments that I'm going to be making tonight about the elections issue, first of all, there is stuff all over the board on both sides of the issue, or people that are saying that, yes, there's fraud, no, there isn't fraud, there's fraud here, and this has happened there, and stuff like that. And it raises up all kinds of huge, what I called emotional responses from people without knowing the specifics. Now, when I was in the Washington State Legislature, elections law was my specialty. Because what you do, you start specializing in a certain area so that you become a spokesperson for the others in what you called, your caucus. And I had, even in the year 2000, the man that was our Secretary of State was going to be retiring, and so which means it was going to open up, and he had basically he was not endorsing anybody, but he was going to let me use a comment and a quote from him saying that I was the best member of the legislature to be the next Secretary of State. So I knew elections laws and procedures very well. So I'm going to make some comments about some of the stuff that's going on out there. Okay. Now, hold on here just a minute. I've got an email that says that Blog Talk Radio didn't let you in until 9 minutes after the start. I have no idea why. I don't know. I have no idea what that is, but we've been in here now for 13 minutes, so I hope for those of you that are on Blog Talk all is well. There is rumors going around out there that basically Trump has basically some real solid issues around election fraud, and that ballots had been put out that they had used a watermark on the ballots so they could tell the difference between the legitimate ballots and some of those fraudulent ballots that came in later that didn't have the watermark. Let me say this. I don't know if they're making that statement. There's absolutely, almost totally impossible that could be done countrywide. Here's why. The federal government has absolutely nothing to do with the administration and the running of elections. Those are all property of the states, and it's in the Constitution that the states are the one who runs elections. And they have the right to pass laws and regulations within each individual state so each and every state can be different. To be able to have a ballot that had the watermarks on them, you basically had to have the cooperation of the Secretary of State to allow that to happen, because here's what happens is that these states have already contracted months in advance with who's going to supply the appropriate ballot paper for the counting machines that they are using. In some states, every county has the choice of what type of a counting machine that they use so that they're not all the same. And we have over 3,500 counties in the United States, and elections are actually carried out at the county level. So technically, you've got at least 3,500 different ballots. Now, and within each individual county, there are still some cities that are running elections because they choose to do some of their areas. And then there's these what are called the subsidiary offices. You could have a little town of 1,000 people who has the dog catcher on the ballot, and the town next door doesn't have it. So there is literally between 15 and 20,000 different ballots out there on election day in a presidential election year. And yes, the president is going to be on every one of those, but the rest of them are going to be different based on their state offices, state elections, the initiatives and stuff like that that are taking place on state and local level issues. To put a watermark quietly and secretly, you would have to have the cooperation of every county elections official in the country. That didn't happen, folks. Come on, that did not happen. Secondly, you'd have to have the cooperation of basically the state elections officer, which in most states is the Secretary of State. And if you're in a state that has a Democrat Secretary of State and a Democrat county elections officer, there's no way they're going to allow that to happen. So that watermark issue, it's possible, yes, in some select counties, in some select states, maybe that could have happened. But it would be very few, not 15,000 different ballots, okay? The second thing is they said they had basically some computer programming that was going on in there, and they were watching and operating the counting with a separate program. Folks, that didn't happen. Again, you would have to have the cooperation of over 3,500 different elections officials. And folks, that isn't going to happen without the news of that leaking out, okay? You can't keep that type of stuff secret all across the country. Now, there is some other issues that are coming up. They're saying about with this one specific company that was running the counting elections issues in 6 different states. And that is possible because, see, the state could choose by rules, say that only one company is going to do all the counting of all the ballots in all the counties in our state. And if you noticed, Yeah, and it was Dominion Software was the name of the company. But the thing is, see, if you notice, Dominion was only doing 6 states. Well, who was doing the other 44 states plus the District of Columbia? You see, so that's where you see the difference. So it is possible, yes, they may have some legitimacy around the Dominion issue. So here it is where we are as of now. The only way Trump is going to overturn Biden is it's going to have to go to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court is going to have to make a decision of one of two things. They're going to have certain states that they have proven and undoubtedly shown that there was enough election mishandling or fraud within the state to change the outcome. That's the issue, to change the outcome. And in Wisconsin, you're talking almost 20,000 ballots. And in Pennsylvania, you're talking almost 20,000 ballots. And in Georgia, you're talking, I think, just under 2,000 ballots. Because, see, Trump has to win Pennsylvania, Georgia, North Carolina. Now, my understanding is North Carolina is very solid for him. He's going to have to turn around Georgia and Pennsylvania, where he was ahead on election night. And then he's going to have to flip one of two other states, okay? And that would either be Arizona, and there is some new potential coming up that there may be some serious counting issues in Michigan, okay? That's what's going to happen. And the only way you're going to do that is that you're going to have the Supreme Court to make a decision, and they have to make a solid, hard, undeniable proof of evidence before them. There's lots of rumor and talk about dead people voting. Well, here's the problem. First of all, you're always going to have a percentage of ballots, a very small percentage of ballots that go out to people who have died. Why? Because they don't notify the elections office of their death before the ballots are printed and sent out in the mail. So because the ballots are printed up about 2 to 2.5 months before the election. They're sent out in the mail 4 to 6 weeks before the election. So if your ballot is printed up 2 months before the election and someone dies, the county, or I should say the death people, don't notify the elections to take them off the roll, so the ballot gets mailed out. And what happens is, it's possible then for someone who is a relative or whoever takes the mail of that dead person, that they then fill out the ballot. And they sign it. And they can fraudulently sign the signature and make it look like their signature. Now that is possible. But those are usually only at the most a few hundred per state. It's not this massive numbers that they've talked about, 10 to 15,000 dead people voting. If there was that many, they would have to show by hard proof that it had a difference in the outcome of the election. Okay? Now, and he's going to have to prove that in court. Now, in my opinion, Trump has a very, very solid case before the Supreme Court in Pennsylvania. And here's why. See, each state gets to decide when the mail-in ballots by law have to be into the elections office. Now, some states, like my former home state, the state of Washington, which is a 100% vote by mail state. They don't have polls anymore, and it's been that way for almost 20 years. They say that the ballot has to be postmarked by election day, and it can still come in to 10 days later. And the reason they do that is because military people, because see, if you're overseas military person, if you're out on assignment, and you may not get back in and you don't get your ballot until just a few days before the election, so you make sure that the ballot gets postmarked on election day in the foreign country in the military post office. But it can take a week to 10 days to get back to the United States so that it gets counted. So that's why they allow that lag time. But here's what happens. If they say that the ballot has to be postmarked by election day, within 3 days, usually by Friday after the election, 98 to 99% of all your ballots are in. But it still takes time to count them, because it's not just, send it through. You got to verify the signature, open the ballot, then you got to separate the ballot in the envelope, and then you got to run the ballots through the counting machine. Now here's the issue in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania's law was the ballots had to be in the elections office by election day at 7 o'clock that evening when the polls close. A lot of states do that who don't have a high number of vote-by-mail people. Well, this year they totally went on the vote-by-mail, campaign, and about half the people were voting by mail. And so what happened in Pennsylvania is that the Secretary of State and the governor willfully decided to extend that deadline 3 days. They decided to violate the state law and under their own decision extend it 3 days. It was challenged in the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court backed it up. Well, here you have a Democrat-controlled Supreme Court, a Democrat Secretary of State, and a Democrat, governor who are making these decisions. That is a solid case to take to the U.S. Supreme Court and to then say that the state court and the governor and the Secretary of State don't have the right to willfully violate the law and make that decision. That is the legislature's responsibility, and they are violating what is called the separation of the branches of government. It's the legislature's job to make law. Then you have the governor who is in the executive branch, and then you have the courts that are in the judicial branch. They have absolutely no right to violate the law of the legislative branch of government. They're violating their constitutional duty and their constitutional rights. So I think Trump has a solid case to make sure that all the ballots in Pennsylvania that came in after Election Day are thrown out and not counted, and he was ahead on election night by about 600,000 votes in Pennsylvania. So that's that issue. But he still is going to have to deal with Georgia and either Wisconsin, Michigan, or Arizona to get that. Now, here is a big possibility that could happen. If this goes to the Supreme Court, the Supreme Court, if Trump's campaign can make a solid case that there were fraudulent ballots, but they can't determine the outcome of them, because here's why. Let's say, again, use the example that it was a dead person that was voting. The ballot comes in, you've got the signature on the envelope, they compare the signature, and then what they do, the election worker separates the ballot from the envelope. The envelope goes out into a separate stack. That is the record that the person voted, but the ballot is totally separated to go through the counting machine, and nowhere on the ballot can you now bring that ballot back to the individual voter because there is no trace on the individual ballot. Ballots are designed so you can never trace who the individual voter was, so you can't tell how the voter voted, because that is the privacy of the election process. If you voted as public, how you vote is not. So they can't trace that ballot back. So they don't know if it was valid or not, or if it changed the outcome or not. With that indecision, if they can show that there were enough discrepancies that the court agrees on, the Supreme Court can say, we can't allow this election to be certified because there are way too many problems and issues of uncertainty of how the process was carried out legally in enough states to turn it around. So the elections process and the electors cannot be certified. So what they'll say, that let's say it's the states of Pennsylvania, Michigan and North Carolina, in Georgia. It says those electors cannot be certified. That means that neither Biden nor Trump have enough electoral college votes to win the election. Even if they took the electors out of those three states, if someone still has the 270, it could go forward. But both of those candidates need those three states. So if that drops out, then the Supreme Court can go to the next step, which is in the Constitution. And the Constitution says, if there are not enough qualified electors to give a candidate the 270 electoral college votes they need, then the election resorts to Congress. Let's say, even theoretically, let's say if it was an exact tie at 269 to 269 and all that was official, no candidate has the 270. So it goes to the next step in the Constitution. And that next step in the Constitution is Congress gets to vote on who is going to be the president. But here's what they do. It's not the individual members of Congress. It's each individual state gets one vote, and then it's who gets 26 states, the majority of the states, is the one who wins, or who wins, quote, the election and becomes the president. And right now, Republicans control 31 states, even though the Democrats have the majority of members. How is that? Because remember, California has 55 members in Congress, and about 70% of them are Democrats. It's California and New York, these two very large states that are very strong blue Democrat states. They are the ones that give Congress and the Democrats the majority of members, but individual states, there are only two individual states. You've got a number of these small states in the Midwest that are all Republican-dominated states. So, if the Supreme Court decides that, and then it goes to Congress, the House elects the president, and the Senate elects the vice president under the same manner. Each state gets a single vote. And in the Senate, again, the Republicans would have the majority. And yes, technically, the Senate could choose a vice presidential candidate and elect someone that is not on the ticket. They do not have to elect Pence. And the House Republicans by state do not have to elect Trump. Now, obviously they would, because that was the choice of the people, you see. And I think the Senate would obviously elect Pence because that's the choice of the people. But they don't have to do that. They can elect whoever they want. That's the process if neither one of the candidates can get 270 qualified electoral votes. My opinion, I think there's a good probability that might happen. Because there's no question, I think Trump's got a solid case to throw out Pennsylvania. And he might have a solid case to show that there was enough problems in both Georgia and Michigan to have those thrown out. And Arizona is not done. They still got about another 60,000 ballots to count, and Trump has been picking up heavily in Arizona. He's now down to around 13,500 votes behind. Arizona is going to go into an automatic recount because the state law basically decides what the margin is so that it does an automatic recount. In Arizona, it's 0.5%, and it's within that margin. So Arizona's going to do a recount, Georgia's going to do a recount, and Trump is requesting and paying for a recount in Wisconsin. I think Pennsylvania will probably end up going into a potential recount, and so possibly will Michigan. So that's the issue about who is going to get this on the outcome. And how long is this going to take? Folks, this can go on for another 3 weeks. It can go on for another 3 weeks. Because, see, the Electoral College vote is not until December 14th. And so it could take another 3 to 3.5 weeks before the courts decide what the issue is here on how this is going to happen. So that's the process. That's what's taking place. And so who knows? So Blanca, why don't you share some of your comments on that, as I have basically made that on. That's on just the election procedure, and can Trump turn this around? Tell me your thoughts. Let's share your thoughts.
Well, I think that was a good, nice, concise point of view of what's going on. Yes, we've seen lots of problems, lots of accusations, and we were discussing that for every issue that comes up, you've got arguments that that's true, arguments that it isn't true, arguments that it's significant, arguments that it's not significant. So really, it's good to keep abreast and to learn about this, because Lord knows we don't want to go through this again. We want to correct the process. So this is a waking up for Americans of how things can go wrong and how precious this process is. And I think if it goes to court, and of course there are already court proceedings, that's where the evidence is going to come out. And
Yes.
That's probably a good thing to pay attention to right there.
Yeah. And I think the issue is that we've got the 5 states. Beyond that, all the rest of the states are pretty much settled and nobody's contending anything. And the 5 states are Arizona, Georgia, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. Those are the 5 states that are still in question. And as of today, Biden is leading in all those states other than North Carolina. So, anything else you want to share with us?
No, it's just going to be interesting to see, too, because they're going to go through recounts, and hopefully that's a fair process, hopefully done a little more judiciously and carefully now that everybody's watching than perhaps it was the first time around. So,
well,
we may...
I think there's absolutely no question on the recount that they will allow what are called poll watchers, both parties, to watch the whole recount process. And the recount will go on county by county is what it will do. So they'll make sure that they've got poll watchers in every single county, recounting. Let me share a story about what happened when I was in our state legislature. In 2004, Washington State ended up with the closest governor's race in the history of the United States on a percentage basis. On election night, out of 3.5 million votes cast, the Republican candidate was ahead by about 15 votes. Well, that sent it into an automatic machine recount. And when they did the machine recount, it only changed it 4 votes out of about 3.5 million votes cast. Well, then the losing candidate in Washington state law has the right to request a manual hand-by-hand recount, and then they have to pay for it. And the Democrat did that, the Democrat governor's candidate. And what it did, it flipped about 40 ballots, or 40 or 50 ballots out of about 3.5 million. And so the Democrat, after the hand recount, the Democrat candidate was ahead by 36 votes. Well, then obviously the Republican candidate took that to court. And the judge, I watched the court proceedings. It was on TV and it went on for 4 days, and I watched all of it. And the judge came down to it and said, you have to show us physically undeniable proof of at least 37 ballots that you can flip over and change. You have to know who the voter is, and you have to understand and just prove it as a matter of fact, and they couldn't do it. So it ended up that the Democrat candidate won after a second recount of 36 votes out of 3.5 million votes cast. And so that's the process. When they do recounts, you will find it might change it 0.25 percentage point at the most. You might find it might change 200 or 300 unless there was massive fraudulent ballot tampering in the issues. And that's the question, and that's what they're going to be looking for. Okay. And as I said, right now, there are 3 states that are going to be going into a recount: Arizona, Georgia, and Wisconsin. And I think you can probably expect Michigan and Pennsylvania to be added to that as well. So with that, Blanca, is there anything else that you want to share with us before we go in and start talking about what's going to be the potential outcome of this based on who gets elected? So.
Well, yeah, I just think it's a very interesting time for us to witness it and to learn about the process. I think I've learned more about election processes than I ever thought I would, and I think that's part of it. I think it's an awakening for Americans on both sides of the political spectrum.
Yeah. Well, people also wonder, why does it take so long to count, the vote by mail ballots? Well, when you're at a polling place, you take the ballot and it's put into the counting machine right there, right on the spot. And the computer is already adding them all up. So by the time you're done on the election, at the end of election night, you know what the result is coming out of the polling places. When a ballot comes in the mail, the ballot is barcoded to the individual voter. So the first thing they do is scan the barcode, and then that registers in the computer. Okay, voter, voter A, we've received your ballot. Then what they do is they're supposed to check the signature. Now, these ballots are in a tray. They've all come in order. They've already been all, scanned through, so they're in order. So they will have the computer bring up on a large screen the voter card signature, so that then they hold the ballot up right next to the signature on the computer screen, and then they compare and make sure that the signature is good. If the individual has any question in it, or if a poll watcher has a question in it and doesn't think that's a valid signature, they can request it to go to a committee of 3 people, and the 3 people then decide whether or not it's a valid signature. Assuming it's a valid signature, then the ballot goes off to another station where the envelope is opened. And then what they do, they take the ballot out and put the ballot in a stack, and then put the envelopes in a stack, and then once again they scan the envelopes that says, okay, voter A. The first time we scan it, it says we received your ballot. The second time we scan it, is saying that your ballot is being counted. It's going to go into the count. So they can always check the count of mail-in ballots versus the number of envelopes that they have authorized to be counted. So there is a procedure to do that. But that's why, mail-in ballots take so long. And some mail-in ballots can continue to come in for days after the election is over. So, because some states allow 10 days, which is Friday, this coming Friday. That's it. Anything else then on the elections process, Blanca, that you would like to share? Any comments, questions?
Oh, no, it was nice. It was good. Again, you read about the different things, but it was nice to get some of your perspective and your individual experience with it. Yeah. Yeah.
So, well, let's talk about now what are potential implications based on who wins. I don't think there's any question that you can see the difference between Biden, who is a part of the old, what I call cabal deep state system, and where Trump is not. I don't think there's any doubt about that. Trump said he was coming in to drain the swamp. Personally, I think he could have done some more concrete logistical issues before this election had come around. But behind the scenes, there's been it's bringing out a lot of the corruption. And if he turns this election around and it's proven in court that there was fraud, it also brings out the corruption in the election system that has been going on behind the scenes. And I think for those of us that are wanting to move forward of basically what is called getting rid of the deep state and draining the swamp, then obviously we would be someone who would be supported behind Trump. If Biden ends up staying as the president, I think you're going to find more influence coming from the deep state. But on my Facebook page, I had put a message that had come. I talk about this lady, Tina Louise Spalding, who channels Jesus. And he had given about an 8-minute message on election day. And he brought out the issue is the fact that even though we have a president in the United States, there's another what is called the unelected government officials, i.e., those who are in positions of power and influence in the government and they're not elected. And they have a huge impact upon what goes on in our everyday lives. The President of the United States really doesn't have that much power that affects us in our everyday lives. Now, last week I'd shared on the program before, they had some recording problems, but I went back and I looked at the 8 years that Obama was president of the United States. And I started asking myself, was there any one thing, one decision that Obama made that personally impacted my everyday life or my issues? I couldn't think of a single one. Not one. The Obamacare issue was a big issue, but it didn't impact me personally because I don't need Obamacare. I don't have anything to do with Obamacare for my health care coverage. So it didn't make any difference whether he was there or other Republicans were there because they didn't do anything that impacted my everyday life. He made some decisions that I disagreed with, but he also made decisions that I did agree with. So at the end of the day, folks, the president really doesn't have that much power over us. The biggest issue of the president is a matter of perception and influence and how it affects us in our perceptions and our emotions. Now that is a responsibility for us as individuals. I've come to the conclusion if Biden ends up, being president, life goes on for me and I'm not even going to let it bother me because I won't pay much attention to him. He won't do anything hardly at all that's going to impact me. He might have some minor things that might end up creating some inconveniences, like you got to wear masks and all that kind of stuff more than what we are now. That's a possibility. But remember, the president doesn't have that much power. The president really is more of an image perception holder than is an actual power holder in how it affects us in our everyday lives. It takes a combined act of Congress and the president to change a law that really has an impact on us. And I don't see that happening as long as the Republicans have the Senate, because then you now got a check and balance between the two parties. So the issue is, if Biden gets elected, how is it going to affect you? Are you going to allow the emotional drama? Are you going to allow the impact of what we call the continued operation of the deep state to continue? Is it going to affect you in your emotions and in your thought frequencies? I've talked about in the past how important it is, and I'm reading this more and more and more from different authors. It is so important that we keep the energy frequencies of our thoughts high so that what goes on in the world that is out there doesn't lower us in our energy vibration of how our thoughts affect our world. That's an extremely important issue. And right now, there's a lot of drama that is going on around this election. I have never seen such an energetic, intense election in my life. And so if it's going to impact you, it's because you're choosing to let it impact you. Rise above it. Be the observer of the drama versus the participant of the drama, regardless of who is the outcome winner. Blanca, share your thoughts on that, because I know we talked earlier today and you had some great comments.
Well, I tend to agree, really, no matter what's going on. If indeed we want to be masters of our own consciousness, we have to master our own state. But this is a very good thing, a very good practice. I think where it gets challenging is when we try to have discussions with others who seem to be living on a very different planet. And so I also see that as perhaps, people will argue, but to me it's almost a wasted effort. If you're trying to change someone's mind who's obviously on a very different trajectory consciously and mentally than you are, it seems to be better just to live in peace, hold your state and let them hold theirs. And we've talked about various ways to talk about that, what language to use, and I've shared with you, Alan and I find it very convenient to think about timelines. And so on a certain timeline, for example, Trump is a favored candidate. He stands for national sovereignty. He stands for bringing jobs to America, or at least that's what he's saying. he wants opportunity for all, etc. Now, as soon as I'm saying that, whoever hates his guts is thinking, yeah, but he's a racist. You see, we could go around and around and around on that. And what I say is, never you mind, those people are on a different timeline. And on their timeline, Biden is the guy. He's going to bring, smoothness again, business as usual. At least that's some of the things I hear. The world is going to like us again and all those sort of things. Well, that's a very different timeline than what I'm writing. And I'm not going to argue about what timeline or what perception someone's going to hold in their consciousness.
You've talked about a key term, and that's called what are the timelines, which are based on perception. It's interesting, and I've been reading more and more material from different authors that are saying we are moving into an era where there is going to be what is called energetically the splitting of our world, and that there are going to be two earths. What does that mean? Well, you have to come back and remember, and I've talked about this in past programs, we live in a world that is a holographic illusion. We think this world is solid and it's physical, but quantum physics will show you, no, it's not. The world is not solid and physical. It is nothing more than massive swirling energy. And anything that is physical is nothing that is energy that is always moving. So it's very amiable. It can be shifted. It can be changed because the energy can shift and change. And what gives it the sense of being physical is because our senses in our bodies give it that sensation. But when you get down to the quantum level of looking at it, there's nothing that is physical. That means because there is nothing that is physical, it's only a matter of a holographic illusion, a matter of perception, the experience that we have. And when you have an issue that is so energetically powerful, you can have people moving in two totally different and opposite directions, and they are going to experience what they are projecting, which means you can have two earths operating at the same time. And there are scientists, physicists that are now coming out and saying that yes, it is possible to basically have different densities that are taking place, and you can be experiencing different earths simultaneously. Because remember, even Albert Einstein says there is no such a thing as time. All past, present, and future are happening simultaneously. Time, he said, from physics is not linear. Time is vertical. The past, present, and future are all here, and we're choosing to focus on where we want to perceive in our current experiences. Well, as you can be in different places in the vertical timeline, you can also shift over and have another Earth that is a holographic illusion that is being created through the power of human thought, and they're experiencing something entirely different than the people on this earth over here. Because in their thoughts, that is the world that they are collectively creating. Let me give another illustration of this. We are moving into a world that there are literally millions and millions of people saying that we're going through our ascension process, and we're going to move into a world of peace and prosperity and harmony and higher dimensions experiences. And yet, on the other hand, there are hundreds and hundreds of millions of people around the world who believe in the outcome of the book of Revelation, of all the apocalyptic, catastrophic events in the book of Revelation. And because they so deeply believe in that, and that's the energy of their thoughts, that's the world they're going to experience. I'm not in that timeline. I'm not in that world. I'm seeing a world where we're moving into increasing our ascension process, increasing the outcome, increasing our awareness, increasing our consciousness, increasing our sense of the love. The frequency of love is increasing. That's the world that I'm moving into. And those of us that are there, That's the world we'll experience, and others, they will experience the catastrophic apocalyptic events because the world is not physical. It's a holographic illusion that we each individually or collectively create through the power of our thoughts. Blanca, your comments.
Well, that was very, very well put. I think a lot of this is languaging, and I like the way you language the splitting of worlds is an energetic process, and so we're learning to talk about it because people say, well, how can there be two Earths? Well, we're talking about it from a consciousness level, from an energetic level, from a frequency level. These are just words that are trying to point to a certain situation, a certain state in consciousness. And really, if you want to test it, just use some of these examples. Think, okay, what if it really is about splitting of timelines? What would things look like if someone was on a different timeline than me? Well, the way it would look at, for example, we can take the example of the mask. Now, some people really, really think wearing a mask is effective. You should do it. It's a patriotic duty to do it, and you're a terrible person if you don't do it, and I'm going to wear my mask to bed, and I'm going to wear my mask in the car. And so that is a particular timeline. There's other people that I've done a lot of research. The masks are really not that effective, and this virus is just a virus. There's a 99% chance of people recuperating from the virus, you see, so they're on a very different timeline. So what you can do is say, why do people have such different perspectives and different realities? Where you say, perhaps it is true, it's a different timeline. Or energetics about conversations. Do you notice if people are in fear? Are people saying, we got to trust the authorities and we got to do what they tell us to do? A certain sort of submission and lack of sovereignty. Well, those are a certain frequency level of thought. Whereas there's other people saying, well, I am doing my research and I'm an adult and I know how to take care of myself. I'm taking things to boost my immunity and I don't need anyone to tell me how many people I can have over for Thanksgiving dinner. That's a very different frequency. And so instead of judging each other about what stupid people we are, or sheeple or whatever, let's stop judging and just say those people are on a different frequency and they're entitled to live it. And I'm on this frequency or timeline and I'm entitled to live it.
You know, what's really important there is that you commented that it's really important that we don't get into judgment over someone who is different than us. You have to let them be and let them experience what they are going to experience in the process of their choices. I mean, you know, we can come back and we can get and take, you know, the choices between Biden and Trump. And I mean, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, how can people who are awake and alert and conscious be voting for Biden? That's my perspective. Then I have to stop. Wait a minute. It's important that I don't judge someone, is because they may be subconsciously choosing to go in that path to possibly be a person of potential or influence to others in that timeline or that path. People make individual choices, and we have to let them make their choices. And in a world that's a holographic illusion, the only basis for the choice is the experience. And what is the experience going to do for you in your awakening, ascension, or your growth process as a predominant spiritual being? And that's something we have to let you do. Even if I disagree with you adamantly, just let it be. Another illustration is be the observer of the difference of opinion, not a participant in the difference of the opinion. Because as soon as you move into judgment, your frequency just drops dramatically. The two things that will drop the frequency of your thoughts and your energy more than anything else are fear and judgment. Those are the two things that drop them faster than anything else. Because as soon as you move into judgment, you're moving into separation. And as soon as you're moving into separation, you're in a low frequency environment. So, your thoughts on that, Blanca?
Right, that's good, and I think you summed it up really well in terms of if people are saying, hey, I think I'm on the timeline, or I wish to live on the timeline where there's more awareness, there's expanded awareness, there's expanded prosperity, there's more love, there's more freedom, then we have to entertain a certain frequency thought. Judgment and fear are not that timeline, you see?
Yeah.
So that's kind of a test. I think part of what we're experiencing, if indeed we want this timeline of expanded awareness and more love and freedom, the test is, can we hold that frequency even though we're encountering other people who don't hold that timeline or that reality or choose not to? That's the test.
Yep. So, well, that's all of my thoughts on our discussion tonight. Do you have anything else before we go to the callers?
No, I think we've got several callers, and I'm really interested in seeing what they have to say in terms of what they're observing and maybe even thoughts on what we just spoke about.
Yes.
And so if you want to share the number, maybe some other people would want to join.
Yes, if you'd like to call in and you have a question or you'd like to make a comment, again, the number there is 515-605-9356, and you see that on your Blog Talk Radio. 515-605-9356. Press 1 on your touch-tone phone, and it lets us know that you would like to come in and join us. So I'm going to go right to the first person on the list. That is in area code 612. Area code 612. So I'm clicking on you now. Area code 612. You're here on the air with Dave. Would you like to share with him or any questions that you might have? I'm not getting any response there. And that person clicked that number 1 very, very early in that. So sometimes that means they're not really there. So nothing there. Okay, Blanca, you're going to that other person. I'm going to go now to area code 203.
That's me.
Okay, area code 203, you're on the air. What can I share with you? What do you have tonight?
Hi, is this Dave? You can hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you just fine. Share your name with us.
Oh, yes, it's Peter.
Okay.
Yes. What I want to know is the election process more corrupt, or do you feel it's invalid or screwed up, something like that?
There's opinions on both sides on that. I think that if there was ever a potential to want to basically corruptly influence an election, this is the year that it would have happened. And there are scenes that very professional people can do behind the scenes that the county auditors, or I should say the county election officials, can't pick up during their process of processing the ballots. You could have a computer program that has some deep down into the software, has some code that is written that you can start flipping results, and the people in the elections office would never know it, and they would have no idea this is going on. That is possible. That is something that, really big dollars, and this one computer company, the Dominion, it might have been possible that they did that with their software programs, because we heard states that were all of a sudden just jumping and flipping numbers of votes right in the middle. And we had one state, they said their software was being updated right in the middle of the counting. Hello, that means that their computer program was basically on the internet, online, where programmers could come in from an off location and could change the program. So that's possible. But I don't know. I have no idea. There's always a small part of it in some pretty, what I saw, corrupt big cities. There's some of that's always there. But seldom does it make a difference in a nationwide election, because it takes a lot for it to make a difference in a nationwide election. So I don't know. It's a hard question to answer. So, okay. Anything else? Oh, he already left us. So I'm going to go now to Rick in area code 616. You're coming up here. Rick, you're on the air, and what would you like to share with us tonight? Or what questions?
Hi, Dave. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, I had a question about the election, and I had heard a channeling from somebody who's very popular, and they said in the channeling that there was a good chance that neither Biden or Trump would be president coming up, and that it will be somebody that would be totally different, somebody that's involved with the military. And my question is there a way that the Supreme Court cannot or can choose somebody to take the place of presidency, or that the Congress and the Senate can choose somebody who's totally different from Biden or Trump for president?
According to the Constitution, the Supreme Court cannot choose anybody other than, they can only make decisions based on law on the election. Now, if they choose to say there are invalid electors, and like I said earlier, then neither Trump nor Biden has 270 valid electoral college votes, then it goes to the next step in the Constitution, and then that's where the House of Representatives selects the president. And it doesn't have to be one of those two. That is not stated in the Constitution. So there is a possibility, and the Republicans have the majority of those votes, so they could choose collectively, say, we're not even going to have Trump, we're going to get someone else. I don't think that would happen. I think there would be such a massive revolt from the voters, the Republican voters, if a Republican Congress made that decision. So I think it's, if it gets to the point where Congress makes the decision, the Supreme Court can't make the decision. They won't do that. That's not their authority to do that.
Okay, so I also heard that through that channel that if Biden was nominated president, then there would be a rebellion in this country. Or if Trump was nominated as president for a second term, there would be a revolution in this country. And that's why there'd be somebody who is involved with the military who would take the place.
I've heard so many different stories. There's different channelers that have been saying different messages, and they're all over the map.
Yeah.
I mean, they're all over. Just because they're channeling doesn't mean that they're authentic. Sometimes their egos are way too involved in it, you see. So there's different channels that have all over the message.
Yeah. My whole bottom line is I don't think it really going to matter either way, because we're still going to go forward as not only a country but as a world in a good way. And, because I really believe that we're just moving to a whole different dimension, so timeline whatsoever. So
if we go through,
especially those who are aware, those who are not aware, I think we're going to be somewhere else. But totally, I think that the whole idea of being awareness and a person who's really understanding with the love aspect is going to really go forward in a big way, because I don't think there's anything else that's going to really conquer that.
Yeah.
So I think it's all going to be good at the end of the day. So.
Okay. All right. But
I feel good about it.
Okay. All right. Good. Thanks a lot. Thanks for joining us tonight. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Uh-huh.
Bye-bye.
If we go through the due process, and this goes to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court gives a legitimate, what I call is justifiable reason for their decisions, and especially if they say we're going to follow the Constitution and refer it on to Congress, then I don't think we're going to see the massive disruptions or protests, coming, or the violence that we had thought that it was potential that we might have. So, okay. Let's now go to Kirk in area code 650. You're coming up, Kirk. You're on the air. What can I help you with here tonight?
Hi, Dave. I had a couple questions about the process. With all the ballots being sent out this year, outside of the normal process of an absentee ballot, could you talk as to how they deal with duplicate ballots or duplicate votes that might come through?
Remember what I said, that on the ballot there is a barcode for the individual voter. Once the first ballot comes in and it's been been scanned and shows that the ballot is in, any other ballot that comes in with that same voter's name, it is pulled out and it is considered as a provisional ballot, and they will inspect the two ballots and they will make sure that only one of them gets counted. See, to have a duplicate ballot means somebody messed up in what is called the election process, which means in the registration, that somehow the person got listed in the voter list more than once, so that's why they've got two ballots for the same person. Now, that can slip through. That is potentially possible for it to slip through. Because let's say a voter lives in a specific location and then about 2 months before the election moves to somewhere else in the same county and re-registers, but they don't catch that the person was lived somewhere, in the old one. So it's possible the ballot goes out to the old address and it's forwarded to the new one. And so then all of a sudden you got a person with two ballots, but they're on their voter rolls twice, and it wasn't caught in a short period of time before the election to delete one. Those are very small numbers, but that can happen. That is theoretically possible that happens. But if it's one person, one voter registration, and it's only one name, once the first ballot comes in, it stops anything else from getting voted in the scanning process with the barcodes. Does that make sense?
Okay, excellent.
Yeah.
That does.
Okay.
So the second question relates to Pennsylvania. I had read that the state law required poll rosters from both parties to have equal access, in essence, or the ability to observe the process. And there were reports that both in Philadelphia and in Pittsburgh that many of the Republican poll watchers were not allowed the same access and shown, able to actually observe the ballots, except that existed. Had you read any of this, or are you
Yes.
aware of this particular? And it goes to the validity of the ballot itself.
Yes, it does.
It's not absurd.
Almost all of the states by law allow poll watchers from the two parties to come in and watch and observe the poll workers to process and count the ballots. And yes, in my opinion, Pennsylvania really screwed up there because they flat out violated the law in allowing the poll watchers to come in and watch the process. And that's why, again, I think another reason why Trump has such a solid case in Pennsylvania. One, the violation of law of extending the days the ballots come in. Number two, denying the poll watchers the ability to watch the process. Because it's back to, what are they hiding? You have a great case to say they're hiding and there's stuff going on behind the scenes and they weren't able to watch it. Poll watching has always been a standard custom procedure for decades in every state in the country, because it keeps it so that it's a fair process. So, okay? Does that explain it?
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, it did. So final question is, you have said that the currency exchange is likely to go on regardless of who the president ends up being. You also mentioned a few weeks ago that there had been at least some movement of money based upon a meeting of two people. I'm wondering if your feelings right now are, is this something that, and then finally you had 4 people that had to be involved in that decision. Where do we stand?
Nothing has changed.
Any movement in this?
No, I don't have any new, and I don't have any new information in the last 2 weeks. So all the information I have is basically, again, what my sources have told me, and it all stays the same, is that, yes, the funds would go forward regardless of who gets elected. And yes, there was meetings about 3 weeks ago that some of the funds was starting to move, and then and yes, it was still going to require the decisions of the 4 decision makers to release all of it down to our level. And I have not received any new information on any of that, so all that still stands.
Would it be your speculation that this process we're talking about tonight has to play out before that could actually happen?
I have no idea. It would be pure speculation on my part if I said anything. I don't have any information to give me anything on one way or other. Personally, I think it does. I think nothing's going to happen until they get the final determination who's going to be president. But that's just me. So, yeah. And I don't have any reason. I don't have any what I call hard information to give a reason for that, other than just my own thought. So.
All right. Be well.
Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you. Well, Wanda, I think that's everybody that we had. I mean, Blanca, I'm sorry. I think that is everybody that we had that said they wanted to call in tonight. I don't see anybody else, do you?
That's right, and I'm glad they did. It's nice to entertain questions and to hear from our listeners, so thank you so much, y'all, for
It is. Good.
participating. Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. Well, folks, thank you so much then for joining us tonight, and I'll be back again next week, and hopefully I can be talking about something other than elections because, but it's big news for all of us, and I can usually give some perspective that a lot of you don't hear because of the experience that I've had. So with that, I want to thank everybody for joining us here tonight, and folks, we will see you next week. Okay, good night.